Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Chet. We begin the 8th perek, which is all about the laws of inheritance. The Mishnah teaches that there are 4 categories of relationships with regard to inheriting one from the other or bequeathing an inheritance to someone. Mishnah: Yesh nochalin umanchilin, v'yesh nochalin velo manchilin, manchilin velo nochalin, lo nochalin velo manchilin. There are some who both inherit and bequeath to each other, so this would go both ways. A second category are people who inherit from the other but do not bequeath to them. The third category is the opposite of the second, that they bequeath but do not inherit. And the last category are people who do not inherit and also do not bequeath one from the other. Let's give examples of each category. Velo nochalin umanchilin. Ha'av et habanim, v'habanim et ha'av, v'achin min ha'av nochalin umanchilin. A father can inherit from his sons, and sons also from the father, and also bequeath to and from each other. So here's the order. If someone dies, then normally if he has children, the inheritance goes to his children. If he has sons, it goes to his sons. If he has no sons, then it goes to his daughters. So that's the first step, is goes to children. If someone dies who has property and he does not have any children, then the second in line is that person's father. The father will inherit. If there is no father either, then it goes to the brothers, the paternal brothers. So the first two are really the same. A father both inherits and can bequeath to a son, and that's the same thing as saying a son also inherits and bequeaths to the father. And the third one is if someone dies and does not have a son alive, then we consider it as if it goes to the father, and let's say there is no father, so who would inherit from the father? Well, that would be the father's sons. So it would go to the deceased's paternal brothers. So paternal brothers both inherit and bequeath to each other, whichever dies first. If the one brother dies and he has no sons and the father is not alive either, then it will go to his brothers. So he bequeaths to his brothers and those brothers inherit. So paternal brothers both inherit and bequeath. Second category: Ha'ish et imo v'ha'ish et ishto ubnei achayot nochalin velo manchilin. A person can inherit from his mother and from his wife. When a woman dies, then the inheritance will go first to the husband if she has a husband. So the husband is the first in line, and if not, then it will go to her sons. So that's the same as saying that a man can inherit from his mother and a man can inherit from his wife. But it wouldn't work the other way around, which we're about to see in the next clause. And furthermore, a nephew from someone's sister also can inherit. So if someone dies, and let's say he doesn't have children, and the father's not alive, and he doesn't have brothers, but he has a sister, so the sister would inherit. But let's say that sister also dies. So this means that he doesn't have any closer relationships, nor any of their children. In other words, not only does he not have sons, he doesn't have not children, he doesn't have grandchildren, and so on. So if the closest relative is the sister would get it. If she's not alive, then that sister's sons will get it. So therefore, a person can inherit from their maternal uncle, but this does not work the other way around, which we're about to see in the third category. The third category is exactly the flip side of the second one. Haisha et baneha. A woman will never inherit from her sons. If a woman's sons die, then it goes through the process that we've said before, their sons or their father or each other, the brothers, or it'll go to a sister, but it will never go from a son to a mother. Nor vahisha et ba'ala. When a man dies, the wife will never inherit the husband according to halacha. It will go to his sons, his father, his brothers, the paternal family, but the woman does not inherit. It's true, the estate will have a responsibility to take care of the woman, to pay a ketuvah, a certain amount of sustenance until she gets the ketuvah, and so on. So there are responsibilities, but the wife does not inherit. And also, a person's maternal uncles will bequeath but not inherit. That's the flip side of the case we had before. So if someone dies and they don't have any closer relatives, the sister could inherit, and the nephew, if the sister's not alive, the sister's son. So nephews can inherit from an uncle, but an uncle will not inherit from his sister's children, right? If those kids die and the mother's brother is alive, it doesn't go the other way around. It only goes in one direction and not the other. And the last category, v'achin min ha'em lo nochalin ve'lo manchilin. Maternal brothers do not inherit from each other, nor do they bequeath to each other, because inheritance always goes through the father's family and not through the mother's family. And so even though they're brothers, but they have different fathers, so since they have different fathers, when one of those maternal brothers dies, then it will go to that person's, right, children, father, paternal brothers, but not maternal brothers. I mean, you could include here also strangers, also don't inherit or bequeath to each other. But the Mishnah gives an example where you might have thought that, well, they're very closely related. However, that's the main principle, that inheritance goes from the father's family and not from the mother's family. And now we ask just a language question. Why in the first example does it say a father inherits from a son, and then we say a son inherits from the father? Why do we do it in that order and not the other way around? So here's a reason why it should be the other way around. It would have been more appropriate to say that sons inherit from a father first. First, for two reasons. Number one, it's not good to start with something negative or with a calamity. When a father dies first and a son inherits, that's the normal course of events. That, right? We hope that that sons will outlive their fathers. So it would have been nicer to start off with habanim et ha'av. To start off as it does is starting off with a tragedy. The father should inherit the son. That means the son died before the father. So first of all, we don't like to start something off in a negative way. Even when we break up a parasha into aliyot, we don't like to start with a negative statement, a negative pasuk. We always want to start off with something positive. So that's one reason. And second reason, ish ki yamut uben en lo. Also, the standard case that's mentioned in the Torah is if a person dies and he has no son, then it goes to the daughter. The standard case in Torah is when a father dies, and then you have to see, well, this goes to the sons. If no sons, then it goes to the daughters. So we should mention the standard case of the Torah first. Okay, good question. The answer is V'tana aidi de'atya le midrasha habiba le. Oh, it's true. Even though the Torah says if a father dies first, goes to the son, but the author of the Mishnah wanted to teach a case that actually is learned from a derasha, is learned from a derivation, is not explicit in a pasuk, because something that one learns from a derasha, from a derivation, is more beloved, because we had to do some effort to figure out what the case would be when a son dies first, and then who inherits. So that's precisely the opposite of what we thought here, although it's true. It's starting on a negative note, but nevertheless we're going to override that because we know what the Torah says. Okay, that goes without saying. That's obvious. The Torah gives a case. But when we have to derive something through derasha, it's a rabbinic derivation, so that makes it all the more beloved that we had a hand in it. It's a partnership between the Torah that the rabbis derive something from and the rabbis themselves figuring it out. And that's why the Mishnah puts that first, the case where the son dies and the father has to inherit it. That's learned from a derasha. Now we ask, Umay derasha? What is a derasha? So how do we know that a father would inherit from a son? Detanya, she'ero ze ha'av, melamed sha'av kodem la'achin. Yachol yehe kodem laben, Talmud omar, hakarov, karov, karov, kodem. This derasha is based on the Pisukim here in Bamidbar 27. That is the fundamental basis in the Torah of the laws of inheritance. So it's worth reading the entire section. Vel b'nei Yisrael tedaber lemor ish ki yamut uben en lo v'abartem et nachalato lebito. This comes right after benot selofchad, and so now it gives a general legal section and says if someone dies and does not have a son, then the inheritance goes to the daughter. So just from that, we can tell that a son is first and then a daughter. And if there is no son and no daughter, then the inheritance will go to the deceased's brothers. Notice that it doesn't say father just yet. It's coming though. And if the deceased does not have a son or a daughter and also has no brothers, then it goes to his father's brothers, which is interesting. It seems to skip over the father, which means that certainly if the father is alive, the father's got to be somewhere in there. It doesn't make sense it would go to an uncle before a father. So anyway, it goes to the uncle if there are no brothers. And if there are no uncles either, no paternal uncles, then it goes to the closest relative. She'era means someone from flesh and blood, someone from the family that is hakarov, that is closest to the person from his family. And this is the law forever. Okay, so this derasha is noticing that father is not mentioned anywhere here. And so this word, lish'era, to a flesh and blood, the derasha is going to say this is referring to a father. And actually it's not in order because even though this comes after uncles, it wouldn't make any sense for the father to inherit only after uncles do, but rather it's going back up there and actually should be before the brothers. So even though it's out of order, it's indicated here that yes, the father would get it. And we're going to learn something from the word karov as well. So here's the Pesukim. And so the Baraita says, She'era, that refers to a father. That's how we know that a father will inherit the son. Yes, first, if the deceased has children, goes to the children. After that, goes to the father. We learn that from the word she'era. So this teaches us that the father comes before the brothers of the deceased. Now, can it be, since we're adding the father, and it's out of order anyway, maybe the father precedes even the children of the deceased? How do you know? Maybe you should put the father all the way up. If someone dies and the father is alive, then the inheritance goes straight to the father, even before children. How do you know that's not true? And that's why the next word after she'ero comes hakarov, the close one, which means whoever is closer, the closer relative gets it. And the Rasha is assuming that a person is closer to his children than he is to his father, even though they're both basically the same relationship, but the children, it makes sense that they should be the ones to inherit before. That's the closest relative. And if there are no children, only then it goes to a father, and only after the father, then it will go to the brothers. Okay, so since we learned this from a derasha, that's why the Mishnah mentions that case first, because it's more beloved. Now we have a follow-up question. Now, how do you know that the Hakarov is teaching us to include the child of the deceased, the son of the deceased comes first, and not the brother? Maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe Hakarov is telling us that the person closest to the deceased, maybe that means the brother. And maybe the brother of the deceased was the one that inherits first on the list. And the answer is Marbe ani et haben sheken cham tachat abiv li ye'ada ve'liste achuza. No, we're going to include the son as the first one because of the following two laws. A son can come in the place of the father for two laws. One is for yi'ud. If a father buys an ama ivriya, this is a young a child who he buys as a slave. The law is that she can work for him until she becomes an adult, and then he is supposed to marry her. And the money that he paid for buying her in the first place is the kesef kiddushin, and so he designates her to be his wife. That's the idea. A family is down and out, and they can't even feed their daughter, so they sell the daughter, and the daughter will work in the house until she's of marriageable age, and then marry the household owner. That would be one case. But then the Torah says, and if the master does not want to marry her, he can designate the maidservant for his son. So you see that a son can take the place of a father. That's one law where we see a son takes the place of a father and not the brother. So it makes sense that the son should be the next in line from a father that dies and take the inheritance and not a brother. The other law is regarding an ancestral field. If someone consecrates an ancestral field to the Bet HaMikdash, so it goes to the Bet HaMikdash. Now, the owner has a right to redeem it before the Yovel comes. And if he redeems it, then it's his again, and it remains his ancestral field. If, however, someone else redeems it, a third party redeems it, then it does not stay with the third party. Rather, at the Yovel, it goes back to the Kohanim, and the original owner does not get it anymore. That's it. He loses his ancestral field if he's not the one that redeems it. Now, here's the law that's interesting for us. If the owner consecrated it, but the son of the owner redeems it, then it stays in the family. It does not go to the Kohanim. It does not remain in the hands of the Bet HaMikdash, but rather remains in the hands of the family. It's still ancestral land. So that's the second law where we see a son can come in the place of a father. And because we see these two laws as precedent, so then we know that it makes sense that the son should inherit the father first and not the brothers. Now we question this. Adraba, marbe'ani et ha'ach sheken kam tachat achiv liyibum. Hold on, you're bringing these two laws. I'll bring another law where the brother does come first, and that is the law of yibum. If someone dies without children, then the brother comes and takes his place, right? The brother basically will fill in, have a child that will be kind of like, he's like a surrogate. It'll be, they considered legally the child of the deceased. So here the brother comes in and takes the place of the deceased brother. So that would be a precedent to say that when someone dies, then his brother should be the one to inherit it, because this law is closer. So why are you quoting these laws about Yi'ud and ancestral land? Why not look at the law of Yibum and say that the brother inherits, and therefore the word karov comes to include that a brother takes precedence over anybody. He's the closest. Maybe the brother is the closest and not the child of the deceased. And we answer, Klum yesh yibum ela b'makom she'en ben, ha b'makom she'yesh ben, en yibum. This is not a good proof from yibum. When do we do yibum? Only when there is no child. Anytime there is a child, there is no yibum. In other words, we look at this person that dies, and first we ask, does he have a child? If he has a child, there's no yibum. The child inherits, that's it. It's good. Only if there's no child, then we do second best. Oh, this man had no child. Okay, let his brother come and do Yibum and take his place. So we see that from the law of Yibum itself, we see that the child takes precedence and should inherit, and only if there's no child, then the brother will inherit. So that's a good answer. Now we ask again, Ta'ama de'ika hai pircha, halav hachi, hava amina ach adif, tepukle dehacha tarte vehacha chada. So although we accept that answer, it seems like the only reason why we give it to a son and not to a brother, the inheritance, is because we have this rejection that Yibum we only do Yibum when there is a child. What if we didn't have that rejection? So then you would have really thought that a brother takes precedence and inherits the deceased before the child of the deceased? We should have been able to figure it out even without that rejection of Yibum, because the comparisons for a son are two cases. You have the designation of the maidservant and ancestral land. That's two ways in which we see a son takes the place of a father, whereas for a brother, there's only the law of Yibum. So even without rejecting the analogy with Yibum, we should have been able to figure out ourselves that a son takes precedence over a brother, because a son has two laws where he takes the place of his father, and a brother only has one law where he takes precedence over the deceased brother. So why don't we just learn from that? And the answer is, Sedeh achuza gufa mahai ta'amahu deka kaima le'letana. Klum yesh yibum ella b'makom she'en ben, ha yesh ben en yibum. And the answer is that the law of ancestral land, the law that a son, if he redeems it, then it's considered redeemed within the family and it remains ancestral land, that law itself we only derive from the law of Yibum. As we learn, this is in Masechet Arachin, there's a discussion about this. In Masechet Arachin, it says, listen, if a person, the owner who consecrated the land, if he redeems it himself, certainly it goes back to him, it's ancestral land. And the Gemara learns that there's one more person that can do that. And it deliberates, is it the brother or the son? And it concludes that, well, look at the law of Yibum. When do we do Yibum? Only when there is no son. When there is a son, then we don't do Yibum. And from that law, we can derive that a son is closer than a brother. And since a son is closer than a brother, and we see that from Yibum, therefore we apply that to the law of an ancestral field. All this is a baraita there that a Tana teaches. And so the law of ancestral field, where a son who redeems it stays as an ancestral field, but not the brother of the owner, then it does not remain an ancestral field. If a brother redeems it, then it'll go back to the Kohanim during the Yovel. That law itself we only know from Yibum. And therefore, it's not 2 against 1. It's really only 1 against 1. On behalf of the son being the closest, we have the law of Yi'ud. On behalf of the brother being the closest person, the Kadov, we have the law of Yibum. So it's really 1 against 1. We wouldn't be able to tell. So therefore, the Gemara had to reject the analogy to Yibum and say Yibum itself is only second best. It's only when there is no son. Then you do Yibum. So you see that the brother takes the place of the father only if there is no son. And once we reject that, then what we have left standing is Yi'ud, that we have the law that a son is designated as a person to marry the Ama Ivriya if the father doesn't want to. So since the son can take the place of the father in that law, that means the son is in fact Hakarov, is the closest relative to the deceased, and therefore the son goes first. And after that, the father, because the father is called She'era. And after that, then you go with the order that are in the Pisukim. Then it goes to the brothers, and then the uncles, and so on. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.